Up until this point in my career, I've exclusively pretty much only used photography lenses for my video work. Whether it's my Sigma 24-70, my Sony 70-200, or some of the other prime lenses I own, there's a reason why I've stuck with primarily photography lenses up until this point. Their versatility, their reliability, and also the fact that they work very well with Sony's incredible autofocus system that is present in their cameras. And at the end of the day, when you're shooting live sports at any level, versatility and speed are a must in this industry. And the versatility and reliability I talk about when it comes to this is a really big reason why I haven't ever really used cinema glass up until this point. For the most part, they don't have autofocus and they usually lock you into one focal length only, which I have used primes in the past to shoot sports, but they really don't match up to the versatility that this can offer you when shooting live sporting events. And for someone who usually needs to react very quickly and working in unpredictable environments, shooting with a prime lens like this definitely felt like a step backwards. But as I've started to lean and work more in the narrative and documentary space in the sports industry, I've started to ask myself the question, what if the look and the style that these lenses offer really is worth the trade-off from the versatility that a photo lens has? And that's where these Blazar Apex cinema lenses come into play, because not only are they cinema glass, but unlike the majority of cinema glass out there, they actually do offer autofocus. And also these are anamorphic lenses, something that I've always been very curious about, but never have tried until now. Now, I don't own these lenses. I actually rented them from a local camera shop here in Toronto in order to give them a try. Shout out Viva Camera. I'm going to give them some love at the end of the video, but they lent me these to try out for the weekend. And after a weekend of using them to shoot documentary style content, I have to say I am both pleasantly surprised and very ready to pull the trigger on one of these on my own end, and I'm going to explain why. Also, really quickly, just to be clear, this is not a Blazar sponsored video. In no way, shape, or form was I paid to make this video. These are actually my genuine first impressions on using these Blazar Apex lenses for the first time. Now, I know a lot of my viewers are either new creatives or people who want to get into this space, so I'm going to really quickly explain what an anamorphic lens is as simply as possible. What you guys are seeing on screen right now is footage out of this lens that is just straight out of the camera, no processing done. And as you can tell, the anamorphic lenses squeeze the image horizontally, which allows you to capture a wider field without having to actually change your focal length. When you then de-squeeze your image in post, you're going to get a much wider and much more expansive field of view than if you were going to be using the same focal length with photo glass. So for example, I have the 50mm here. If I shot the 50mm next to a 50mm from my collection of glass, and for example, I'll just pull out, this is a 55mm. If I was to put these side by side footage wise, they will look similar, but the field of view from this one is going to be much wider and much more expansive. There are also other benefits that come with shooting anamorphic, such as very unique lens flares, oval bokeh, and just a general unique character that only comes when you're shooting anamorphic that you normally wouldn't get when shooting with regular photo glass. Now, that is a very basic overview. So for all my cinema lens lovers, please don't come at me in the comments. I'm trying to keep it simple for my audience. There are so many people out there who can explain this way better and more technically than I can. So if you want to learn more about them, go check out someone else's videos. For me, this was a very basic overview for those who are new to this world. Now, this past weekend, I did get to use both of these lenses, the 35 and the 50mm, in two very different scenarios to test them out and see if I liked them. One was a very simple gym shoot, watching an athlete work out and do their thing, part of a bigger documentary style project, but it is basically your typical gym shoot where you don't have control of the lighting and you're kind of just following the athlete around very, very simply. And the other one is actually a documentary shoot that I'm doing with my friend Liam, who's preparing for the Chicago Marathon, and we did a more stylized hero shoot at sunset. I wanted to see what this would look like in a very unique environment like sunset and blue hour, and in both scenarios, these lenses blew my socks off. I can't tell you how different it is to shoot with these and how unique of a look they give, and I'm not gonna lie, I am very close to purchasing at least one of these. Obviously, only a few days with these lenses don't give me the justification to do a full review on them, but I do want to make some content around them because these were actually so fun and so unique to use. So consider this more of a first impressions of a filmmaker using anamorphics for the first time, because that really is kind of what I just went through, was getting my first impressions of what using these is actually like. And then I'm going to also talk about, do I think whether or not these are worth getting for sports videographers or sports filmmakers? Is this something you should invest in? And I'm going to give you guys my honest thoughts in this video. Now, like I mentioned before, I got to test these two lenses in very different scenarios, and I'm going to kind of go through how I used them and when I used them in those specific shoots. Now, the first shoot was a gym shoot where I was essentially documenting an athlete during their summer workouts, and in this shoot in particular, there was nothing I could control, from the lighting, from the positions I was in, from the space I had to actually be in the gym. And for me, that is a very run and gun style scenario. That's very similar to what I would be doing during a live sporting event. And for me, I've always known cinema lenses as something that you would need a lot of setup and prep time for. You need someone to pull focus. You might need very particular lighting. In this case, that all went out the window. I used the lighting being that it was in the room at the time, I didn't really have the ability to tell the athlete what I wanted them to do. I was simply a fly on the wall documenting what was going on. The 35mm was excellent for capturing kind of the bigger picture of where the athlete was and what they were doing. I think between the two of them, and I love both of these focal lengths, the 35 was very, very versatile for me. I was able to get the actual gym in picture and also be able to get a little closer to the athlete without being too much in their face in terms of like the proximity to the camera. This is very organic looking feel, and if you've ever used a 35mm lens before, you know that it is very, very similar to what we see with our eyes, and it is generally one of my favorite focal lengths, and using it in this was an absolute treat. And then I ended up switching for the 50mm when I wanted to get closer to my athlete and I didn't want to be directly in their face. It's not that much of a difference in terms of like the actual focal length jump from 35 to 50, but this one just compressed everything a little bit more, allowed me to get into different positions. So these two were the perfect combination to use in tandem for a gym style shoot where I'm just capturing an athlete doing their thing. The one thing I really had to get used to really quickly with these lenses was how to frame properly. And if you guys are shooting with these ever, I would recommend having a monitor. I use the Atomos Shinobi here on my Sony a7S III, and that does have a de-squeeze in there that you can de-squeeze your image while you're viewing it. Just having that extra room on the side made it a really unique scenario where I had to adjust my compositions and the way I was framing things, but it wasn't that drastic of a change that I kind of felt like I was in no man's land. Once I understood how the image was going to look, it was a very easy switch for me. Kind of imagine that there's less vertical space for you to shoot in and way more horizontal, but that also adds to how expansive and how big everything feels. And I really do think that these lenses give a bigger than life feel when you're shooting with them.
Quick pause from today's video because I just want to take a quick second to say thank you to all of you who are watching and engaged with my content over the last few years. Whether you've been subscribed, dropping comments, liking, or even just watching these videos, you have no idea how much I appreciate that and how much it's helped me progress and grow this channel to where it is today. And I really just want to say thank you for a quick second, because I would not be here where I am today making YouTube videos on the side of what I'm doing if it wasn't for your incredible support over the last little while. You guys know very well that I'm here because I want to help you guys grow and break into this industry in the same way I did. And I know that is a pretty big task and something that can be really intimidating, from figuring out how to shoot sports, nailing the right look, or even breaking into the right rooms and learning how to network with the right people to get opportunities. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but I'm here to try and provide value and help you guys along the way. And there's one other way that you guys can support me and that I can help you guys that I want to talk about really quickly. If you've ever gotten value from the content I'm posting here on YouTube and you want to support me a little bit more directly and also get more bang for your buck on how much you can invest in this industry, I actually have a full digital storefront website with a ton of assets and resources to help people just like you guys who are actively working or trying to break into the sports creative industry. On my digital storefront, there are a ton of products that I've been curating over the last few years in order to help you guys create content better and faster than ever before, like the LUTs I use to color grade my videos, the Lightroom presets I use to edit all of my photos, and even strategy guides and email templates for how to reach out to sports teams and get opportunities faster. No pressure whatsoever, but if that sounds helpful or interesting to any of you, just know the link will be down in the description below for you guys to check out my digital storefront and all those assets I previously mentioned. And even if you don't end up buying anything, your support by just watching today's video means the world to me. Anyways, that's it for me. Let's get back to today's video.
I also ended up shooting an interview with these lenses, and it was a really unique scenario because we only had 15 minutes with the athlete and all I was given was a boardroom. So essentially, once I found my positioning in the room, I ended up putting my camera on a saddle in the middle of the boardroom and put the 35mm on there, because typically when I'm shooting an interview, I would use my 35mm Sony prime lens. So by using this, it gave that wider, more expansive feeling, and it definitely was a very unique look for the interview. I feel like when I'm in post, I'm probably gonna try and punch in a little bit to get rid of that expansive view, just because for an interview, you want the focus to be on the subject and not the surrounding area. And in theory, I should have used the 50mm in retrospect, but at the end of the day, these are also very capable lenses for any interviews you're doing for your documentary style projects. I would just be very mindful of which focal length you're using and how your subject fits in the frame. But overall, from our first shoot, I have glowing reviews from both these lenses in both the fly on the wall style documentary and also using them as interview lenses. The second shoot was definitely a little bit less run and gun and more planned. There were a few variables that were out of of control, but for the most part, I kind of had more room to actually test what these lenses were like in a more controlled scenario. For context, I'm shooting a documentary with my friend Liam Hamlin for his journey towards running the Chicago Marathon in 2025 this coming October. And this shoot that we planned out was very much just a very basic hero shoot. There wasn't much action to be had. I kind of wanted just to get some shots of him by the lake, reminiscing and thinking ahead towards the marathon, and also thinking back towards his motivations for running the marathon. I'm actually really excited about this project, and I'm trying my best to document the whole process of doing it. So stay tuned for more on that, as I definitely will be sharing more on the channel very, very soon. But with this being a much slower, intentional shoot, I got to actually see what these lenses were all about when you add intention behind them. And I vividly remember being on this bridge here in Toronto during sunset when we started shooting. And immediately, as soon as I got Liam into frame and I started putting him in the positions I wanted him to, I said wow probably several times, and I think I might have said on camera for my behind the scenes shooter, shout out Greg, who's my behind the scenes shooter that day. I basically said, I think I'm gonna buy these right away, because the images that I got with Liam that day pretty much sold me on the lens.
Holy fuck, this looks so stupid. It looks sick.
Yeah, so just keep, there you go. Oh, okay, do that again. Oh.
Sorry, I'm laughing at how stupid this looks. In a good way.
So while I did get a lot of really good stuff in the gym in the morning, when I knew the shots I wanted and when I had control of my framing and my subject, that's when these guys really, really started to shine. The 35mm was immediately the star of the show that day, because at the end of the day, 35mm is such a versatile focal length, with it being kind of the middle ground between a wide and almost getting to the telephoto. But in this case, with it being anamorphic and having that extra wiggle room, I was able to use this for pretty much anything, from getting those wide expansive shots of the area we were in and getting the establishing location shots, to getting Liam as the main subject, to framing him, getting his pensive thoughts, getting him looking around, getting details in the environment. This lens was perfect for, and I'm pretty sure I said this on the day of, but if I was to get one of the two right now, and I love both of these lenses, the 35mm focal length using an anamorphic lens was absolutely incredible, and some of my favorite shots from that entire day were with this lens alone. Now, truthfully, I used the 35mm Blazar for about 80% to 90% of that shoot, and I actually used this only exclusively on a gimbal, which might come as a surprise to a lot of you guys, because I'm a very verbal advocate of not liking gimbals, and there's many reasons why. I've made a full video about it. But at the end of the day, I ended up putting this on my A7C Mark II, while this lived on my Sony A7S III, and with this combination on the gimbal, it got me some really unique movement shots with Liam. Even though this was more of an emotional style shoot, this was a bit slower pace, I knew I still wanted to try these with some action in them. So I got this on the gimbal, I started running with Liam, behind Liam, in front of Liam, and I was really, really surprised with the shots that came out great, how good this looked with movement and how it compressed the background, but still gave me that, you know, wide expansive feel that I keep talking about. There's one particular shot when Liam is running through the trees that just blew me away with this lens. And one thing I think that I learned about these lenses and using anamorphics in that second shoot with Liam was there is something about that, the way the images coming out of this are produced, the way that the anamorphic changes the image, the characteristics that come with these lenses really lend themselves to storytelling, really lend themselves to tapping into emotions, and not just being tools, but things that actually impact the storytelling of whatever you're trying to do. And while I could have gotten a very similar result with my photo lenses, there is something about these two that just allowed me to tell a story in a much more unique way that I haven't been able to do before. And that's really what sold me on these two lenses that day. They don't just look good and produce a good image, but they actually help me tell the story and say and project a feeling without actually having to say anything at all. And I know that might not make sense, but they just really do help tell a story with the way the images come out from these two lenses. Now, as great as these lenses are, and I've just been glazing them this whole video, there are a few quirks and a few things about them that don't really make them the best choice for everyone, and I'm gonna get into that now. First of all, framing your image on these lenses does take a little bit more effort. Like I said, it does kind of change the way you have to look at the world from your camera. And if you're just learning video and composition and framing right now, I think it's more important to do that on a photo lens because it's much more natural. It is a bit of a weird jump and probably could look a little intimidating once you throw one of these guys on. But at the end of the day, that is just a characteristic of shooting anamorphic. You either like it or you don't. You either need it in your shoot or you don't. But I think when you're just starting off, it definitely is a bit of a steep jump. So if you aren't used to framing your images or you're just getting better at composing your images, I would stick to photo lenses for now before you make a jump to one of these. Secondly, these are Super 35 lenses, which means they're made for cameras with APS-C size sensors, which means if you have an FX30, you're kind of laughing all day because these are actually made for cameras like that. But If you're like me using a Sony a7C Mark II or a Sony a7S III or even an FX3 because they are basically the same camera, you will need to make a few changes. There's a few things I actually learned while using these lenses. Number one, the a7S III and the FX3 actually don't have a Super 35 mode, at least in 4K. Because there's a 12 megapixel sensor, you can only access APS-C mode through shooting 1080p and not 4K. And as you guys know, I shoot pretty much everything in 4K these days. And so what I ended up having to do on my Sony a7S III is using clear image zoom, which basically allows you to punch into 1.5 times your focal length without losing much, if at all, any quality at all. And so I ended up having to use that mode here, and there was not really a problem with that, except for the fact that a lot of the focus modes that I love about this Sony camera, like the eye tracking, were not available while using clear image zoom. So if you are someone who heavily relies on eye tracking autofocus, keep in mind you're not going to be able to do that if you have something like the FX3 or the a7S III. The autofocus still works, and I think the autofocus for these lenses is great, but it could have been much better if you were able to use all the focus features that are available while using the full sensor. However, if you're shooting on something like the Sony a7 IV or the a7C Mark II, because they are 24 megapixel sensors, you can use APS-C mode and keep all of your focus features without a problem while using a lens like this. And like I said, I ended up using my a7C Mark II, which I'm shooting on right now, on a gimbal with the 50mm, and for me, it was an absolute game changer when I was able to track my subject in front of me as he was running. That is where the autofocus feature of these lenses really started to shine for me. I was able to use autofocus on the a7S III, but it just didn't have the added capability of being able to have the subject or the eye tracking that I really love when it comes to Sony cameras. So that is just something to keep in mind. Depending on the body and depending on the camera system that you have, you will have to make some changes and give up some things in order to use these lenses. At the end of the day though, I was able to adapt with the a7S III and I shot the majority of my footage with it, but there is definitely an advantage having a camera like the a7C or the a7 IV because you have that ability to crop in APS-C natively while shooting in 4K. One more thing about the whole autofocus thing, like I said, it was totally fine when I used it on my a7S III, but the one problem is, and something that I always use on a lot of my photo lenses, is these focus hold buttons. And if you guys have never used the focus hold buttons, let me tell you, they're a game changer. But essentially, whenever I'm shooting and I want to keep focus on something that's in my frame and already focused on, I click one of these buttons and it's locked in. When I was shooting in the gym with the athlete, with the 35 or the 50, I had no focus hold button. There is no focus hold button on these lenses. So if something happened to walk in front of my frame, the focus would normally jump. So what I ended up having to do was go into manual focus. So buyer beware if you are thinking of getting these or trying them out. If you are in a situation where there's a lot going on in front of you and a lot of people moving in front of your subject, you will need to use manual focus, which was something I had to do a handful of times. But at the end of the day, you should be learning how to use manual focus anyways. But with a lens that does have autofocus features, it would be nice to have some kind of focus hold button. I know it's a cinema lens, they're probably not gonna put that in there, but at the end of the day, that's just another little drawback, a little kink that you need to worry about when using these lenses. But at the end of the day, I really didn't mind having to go into manual focus and adjusting it. And when you're in a gym and an athlete's working out, they're not really that dynamic, so that also helped me. But just keep that in mind. If you're trying to shoot sports that have a lot of moving things in front of frame, you may struggle a little bit with the autofocus system on this lens because there is no focus hold feature like that. Now, before I ended up using these or even thought about purchasing them, let be, I always had kind of one hesitation and one question in mind. Will getting these lenses pretty much make my current photo lens collection obsolete? I'm happy to say that it's absolutely not going to make it obsolete. If anything, it's actually going to make me much more selective about the lenses I'm using in current scenarios. And that's something that comes with a lot of like maturity and growth in the film space and the creative space, is knowing when to use the right tool at the right time. And while these two lenses are absolutely beautiful and arguably capture a much nicer image when it comes to film, in terms of what it looks like compared to my photo lenses, at the end of the day, camera lenses like this with autofocus systems, with zoom features, so many other things that photo lenses offer are always going to be better in those unpredictable, fast-moving environments like a sporting event. My 24-70 and my 70-200 simply aren't going anywhere because at the end of the day, these offer better advantages like having zoom capabilities, having focus hold buttons when I'm in those live sporting events. Whether I'm shooting football or hockey, I feel like I'm gonna be much more comfortable using these in those scenarios versus having to stick to one focal length for the majority of a game or a period. At the end of the day though, what I've learned is that these are a very specific use case. This is when you want to add a little flavor, a little spice to whatever you're shooting. And these lend itself way more to controlled environments. So I feel like if I do end up purchasing these, they're going to be a complementary lens to what I already have. Say pre-game, I have some ability to move around and get close to the players, I might throw on one of these guys. But then when it comes to actually capturing the action, I'm probably going to stick with these. I do want to eventually try these in a live sporting event scenario, but that just wasn't in the cards for this weekend. But already having shot 2 documentary style scenarios, one being somewhat of a run and gun situation, somewhat similar to a game, I can happily say that these still will have their place in my kit if I ever do decide to get these, but these will add a little bit of extra spice whenever I end up using them in certain scenarios. To keep it really simple for you guys, if you have control of your environment, if you have control of your subject, if you can set lighting, if you can, have a narrative going on in what you're trying to shoot, again, think documentary, think short film, think media day. These would rock for media day. I would grab one of these immediately because it gives you that really unique look, and when you have control, you can get some really beautiful images out of this lens. If you have no control over your environment, if you have no control over your subject, if there's a lot of things moving in front of your frame, if you are kind of flying by the seat of your pants, I'm gonna stick with something like the Sigma or the 70-200. This is a stylistic choice, adding a little bit of spice. This is jack of all trades, old reliable, you know what you're gonna get. So that's kind of how I'm gonna move with these lenses moving forward if I decide to get them compared to my photo lenses. And I'm gonna end up getting one of them, and it's probably gonna be the 35mm because I loved the way this lens looked. But that's kind of how I'm gonna categorize it in terms of when I would use what lens, in case you guys were curious. Finally, to conclude this video, is this something that your average sports videographer should look into getting, or should they stick with these guys? In my opinion, you need to have a very intentional use case for these lenses. If you are shooting a lot of documentary, narrative, etc., things I've just kept on saying, if you have a use case for them, I don't see why not, because it gives your footage and your content a new lease on life. Like I said, I was really blown away with how I was able to get such a drastically different image with the same camera I've been using for years just by switching out to one of these anamorphic lenses. If you have an intentional use case for them, I think they're totally worth it. However, if you are just someone who's just starting off, if you are someone who is shooting a lot of live sports and you don't really have the use case for having one of these, don't worry about them right now. Seriously, you're not missing out on that much in terms of the quality of the image compared to this. This is still, the Sigma 24-70, for example, is a fantastic lens. It's sharp as hell, and it does the job better than most lenses I've ever used. So don't feel like if you're not shooting anamorphic, you're missing out. At the end of the day, just make sure you have a use case for having one of these lenses, because the last thing you want to do is spend almost $1,000 on one of these and have it sit around and do nothing for you. Also, really quickly, I just want to say a huge thank you to my friends over at Viva Camera for lending me these lenses for the weekend before I bought them. Matt, Connor, you guys are absolute rock stars. And if you guys are ever in the Toronto area and you need camera rentals, whether it's a camera body, camera accessories, lenses, whether it's photo or cinema, lighting, etc., the people over at Viva Camera are fantastic and will take care of you every single time. So thank you to you guys. Go give them some business if you're ever in the Toronto area. And just remember, if you guys are ever wondering about whether or not to get a new piece of gear, always rent before you buy, at least in my opinion, because I could have bought one of these and hated them. Instead, I rented them, learned I really liked them, and I might invest in them. So just a small tip, if you're looking to invest in new camera gear that you're not sure of, always try renting it and see if it's worth your time and money. I really do think my biggest takeaway from these lenses is that they made creating and shooting fun again. Not to say I haven't been having fun with my career lately, but when you find a tool that really invigorates your creativity and lets you do things in a different perspective and see your subjects and what you're capturing through a different light, I will never take that for granted, which is why I'm very tempted to get one of these. If you guys have any questions about my experience using these lenses, please leave them in the comments down below. If you guys are new here and you guys enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and also liking the video, as that would help me grow the channel a ton. And lastly, if you guys made it to this point of the video, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate each and every one of you who come to my channel and watch my videos. I know I've been AWOL for the last couple of months. It has been a really busy time, but I'm really excited for this to be my first video back to bring something very new and distinct to you guys. So if you guys have been waiting for my video and you're back watching again after my little hiatus, welcome back. I'm happy to be here and I'm so excited to bring you guys this video today. And that does it for me in this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.